Hi, Ghouls. This is Ygraine, one of the contributors from Ghouls Magazine, and I am here today to talk about mental health in horror and specifically Frankenstein and the theme of loneliness. Ever since I was little, I've always resonated with horror that is centered around the feeling of loneliness. Growing up mainly in my adolescent years in rural Ireland, I came to relate with the monsters in horror literature and film. In more cases than not, these isolated monsters in these stories are depicted as monstrous by a larger society that has deemed them different and therefore dangerous. Misunderstood and utterly alone, these monsters become angry and vengeful and turn to destructive means to express their distaste with how society has marginalized and outcast them. One work of horror that I feel is the epitome of loneliness is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Written in 1818 by English author Mary Shelley, Frankenstein is a gothic science fiction story centered around the doctor Victor Frankenstein, who is hell bent on creating a living, breathing creature from the various body parts of criminals and newly buried corpses. Though he succeeds in bringing to life a man, he instantly is horrified by his creation and rejects him. The creature recognizes his father's rejection and leaves to experience the outside world. Despite the creature being pure of heart and quite innocent, wherever he goes, he is met with anger and hatred because of his appearance. Society turns the creature into a monster due to its treatment. The creation is desperate for a companion and friendship, but is forced to be alone, and thus is born his wish for vengeance against his maker. On my first reading of Shelley's Frankenstein, I found myself wholly resonating with the plight of Frankenstein's creation, dealing with my own type of toxic parental rejection, as well as never feeling like I quite belonged within any sort of friendship groups. Even as I matured into my early 20s, I constantly felt alone. Due to trauma from my childhood, diagnosed depression, and a longing to be seen, I tried to satiate that longing by allowing myself to be used and abused because I was just so desperate to not feel alone anymore. The only time I never felt alone was when I was immersing myself in horror amongst the monsters who I began to feel like were my only friends because they were just as lonely as I was. The theme of loneliness in Frankenstein is one that has become somewhat of a legacy amongst the works of horror that it has strongly influenced. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Season 2, Episode 2, called Some Assembly Required, a school friend of the Scooby Gang, Chris, is seen to have brought back his formerly dead brother, Daryl. Daryl has been resurrected through the abuse of science, just like Frankenstein's monster, with Chris representing the Victor Frankenstein character. During the episode, audiences discover that just like the novel, Daryl, aka the monster, wants Chris to make him a female companion. Chris and his friend Eric have been collecting female body parts and plan to have Cordelia's head as pride of place on the shoulders of Daryl's bride. The underlying subtext of what loneliness will cause people to commit is clear in the handling of Chris's feelings of isolation after his brother dies from a hiking accident. This also has an impact on his home life, especially within the fact that he's largely ignored by his mother, who has obviously become engulfed by her own grief after the death of Daryl. Due to an skewed sense of his own grief and the subsequent loneliness, Chris Frankensteins Daryl. After Daryl has been brought back to life, he realizes that he can never be reintegrated and welcomed back into the society he was once a celebrated part of. And from this fear of loneliness, he begins to crave companionship in the form of a female made up of the body parts of local girls, eventually guilting Chris to commit murder in order to complete his bride. Another work of horror that implicitly deals with a person's loneliness and its consequences is the 2002 Lucky McKee directed May. Starring Angela Bettis as the titular character, May is an awkward veterinary nurse who is obsessed with dolls and body parts. Due to a toxic parental relationship in her childhood, May struggles to connect with the people around her and faces constant rejection, which exacerbates her mental health struggles and really highlights her feelings of loneliness. Desperate for a friend and to be understood, May turns to murderous means to fashion her own companion. Representing both the role of maker and creation, May is the modern day version of the modern Prometheus. I've only recently seen May, but it immediately hit me right in the heart, exactly the same way as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein had back in my teenage years. May's character and her struggles with her mental health being a product of an overbearing and abusive mother, resulting in crippling loneliness, is one that I could immediately identify with as how I had felt during my 20s. Desperately trying to appear normal and masking in an outer societal environment in the hopes I would be accepted by anyone. I had only wished I had seen May in my teenage years. Horror, and especially my love of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, has always been my go-to comfort blanket, ever since I was a morbid and macabre obsessed little kid. And then when I became a desperately lonely adolescent and 20-something-year-old, it has provided a space in which the monsters became my best friends, my community, and an understanding metaphorical hug.